it's time to harvest some of our leafy greens out of our good-for-you vegetable garden, but today we might more appropriately call them leafy reds. And what I'm talking about right down here is a beautiful, beautiful lettuce. This is called Galactic, and it's just the deepest burgundy color of lettuce that I have ever seen. It's a leaf lettuce, and it's actually available from Shepherd's Garden Seeds, but you can see it's just a pretty shiny, very dark red color, very eye-catching from across the garden. And also, when you couple it with just a regular green lettuce, look how bright that is. You could make a very pretty edible landscape. Now, I'm actually harvesting some of these younger leaves because they make a really good salad. And when you get them when they're really small like this, they're nice and tender, and you don't have to worry about them being bitter. Now, these larger lettuce that I have here, this leaf lettuce, I should probably just go ahead and harvest the entire lettuce. But for these smaller ones, I could just come along and pick some of these leaves on the outside and let the rest grow. But that's a really pretty addition to the garden. Now, another one that's very ornamental but also good for you is our kale here. This is red boar kale, and we got this from Thompson and Morgan Seed, but it's also available from Cook's Seed. And here again, it's just really pretty. You can see as it comes out here, it's kind of really kind of a purple color to it, very fringy leaves, and also the stems are purple. You can see here that they're kind of a nice color. The veins are purple, and then we've got that nice ruffled effect that continues even as the leaves expand. And again, I'm going to harvest some of our larger leaves here. Now, kale, it's not only pretty, but it really is very good for you to eat. It's high in calcium, and the calcium that's available in kale, a higher percentage of it is actually available to your body when you eat it. So, having kale in your garden is not only pretty, but it's also very good for you. Now, one of our last greens that we're going to harvest is another red green, and this is our mustard here. This is giant red mustard, and it's available from Cook's Seed. And with the mustard, you can either harvest the entire plant just down here at the base, or again, you can just harvest some of the outer leaves here and let the rest grow. And this way you'll extend your season. Now, all of these leafy greens are very good for you, and I'm going to continue harvesting here, and Barbara is going to show us how we can cook these up so we can get all those nutritious vitamins and minerals into our bodies.
Greens are a powerhouse of nutrition, but a lot of us avoid them for a couple of reasons. We don't have a history of them, and even if you do, you probably think that they have to be cooked for an hour or two, and then you have to eat the pot liquor with cornbread. Well, that's not always the case, and we're going to look at some alternative ways to cook them today. But before we get started on cooking, I want to point out a couple of things about preparation. One is that you can use most greens in other recipes for other greens, so that if you have collards and you have a recipe for mustard greens, you can use it. You can also find recipes for cabbage and use them that way. You can use them raw, steamed, sauteed, boiled, most any way you want to cook them, greens will work. But before you get to any of those, you need to look about preparation and getting them ready. You can see that this kale is very curly. There's a lot of places where grit could hide, and trust me, it will. So you need to wash them several times before you begin to prepare them in the kitchen. I recommend that you do this, take a couple of wash basins out to the garden if you've got some drinkable water out there, and do several washings outside before you bring them in. And the reason for that is that you can then recycle that water directly onto the garden. You can see that this is mustard greens. It doesn't have as many gritty places, and this is the one we're going to use today. And even with without as many places for grit to hide, I still had to wash it 6 times before I could lift it out of the water and find that there was no grit left there and no dirt on the bottom of the basin. So it takes a lot of washing, but you don't want to let it soak in the water, otherwise it gets waterlogged. You also lose nutrients. They are a powerhouse of nutrition, and many of those nutrients are water soluble, so that if you do cook it for an extended period of time, or you have a lot of liquid left in the pan, you've got to try like crazy to use that liquid, because a lot of the nutrients will be floating into that liquid as the product cooks. Now, another thing you're going to find with greens is that there's a lot of variation. There's many different kinds, from sorrel to beet greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, kale, collards, across the board. Dandelion greens are another one. And while you can switch recipes, there are some things that you have to look at. You may need to extend cooking times. Also look at when you prepare them. Sometimes you'll find that they have a big rib down the center. Sometimes it's so sturdy that you actually have to cut it out. Now, if you're using young greens, you may not need to remove it at all. Sorrel is a green that you usually can leave it in. But if you do find it's a problem, and you can find out a little bit just by tasting it, fold the leaf in half and then simply pull the stem out, and that will also pull out some of these other fibrous things, and then that you set aside, and then this green is ready to use either as a salad or in cooking. Very simple to do. Now what we're going to do today is basically a wilted salad, and as I said, that you'll find this one cooks very quickly, so that we're going to start the burner here and let the pan just get a little bit hot. Turn that heat down a bit. Add some vegetable oil. I have 2 tablespoons, but if you want to cut back the fat, you could do that. You could cut the fat back by about half. Now the interesting thing about this one is we're going to use mustard seeds. I've got about 1½ teaspoons of mustard seeds, and I'm going to add that to the oil, and we're going to let them pop basically the same way you pop popcorn. Now in order to avoid popped mustard seeds all over the house, we're going to partially cover it. We want the heat to be able to get out, but we want the mustard seeds to stay in. And you'll begin to hear them pop after, there they go already. And after 2 minutes or so, the popping will subside, and you'll be able to go on with the next step. Okay, once that popping subsides, as much as you can, you add some onions. I've got about 1 small onion or half of a medium onion, and you're going to let that saute in the oil with the mustard seeds just until the oil to the onion is limp. When the onion is softened a little bit, lift it up off the heat and add the vinegar. Take it off the heat because the vinegar fumes are going to come up and get you pretty strongly if the heat's directly on there, and that lets you do that without quite as much sinus clearing effect. Bring this back to a boil, and I have prepared the mustard greens so that I took the stems off them and the center parts there that were a little bit tougher, and to that, then I just cut them in about 1/2-inch strips, and then this is just a wilted salad, so we're just going to pour this over the top here. And you can adjust the amounts if you decide that this is more dressing than you'd like. You mix that together a little bit, or let it just melt down or soften down. You'll notice that greens do collapse dramatically. When you start with about 1 pound of greens, when you cook, you're going to have about 1/2 cup. So you do need to start with a lot. If you're preparing a salad like we have today, you need to dry them well so the dressing will adhere, or if you're serving them raw. But if you're going to serve them cooked, then you can leave that moisture that's left on them adhered to it, and it will be used in the cooking process. Now over that, we're going to just sprinkle a little bit of bacon. Again, those of you who are looking at cutting the amount of fat in your diet down a little bit, you just use half the amount of bacon, or you could look for a turkey bacon as an alternative instead of the type we have here. Collard greens are an excellent source of beta carotene, vitamin C. They're also a little bit messy if you don't watch it a little bit. Stir that together and it's ready to use. Now another way I wanted you to see that they could be prepared is as part of a soup. Now I have a soup recipe that I'm using, but any soup recipe would do. You could even use a canned soup or a canned stew. This one has a lot of black beans in it. It's got sweet potatoes in it, so it's very high in nutrition. But these mustard greens and the other greens themselves are also high in nutrients. I mentioned a couple of them already. They're also high in folacin and calcium, but they're high in oxalates, so that calcium may not be available to you. What I have here are some mustard greens again, but again you could use any kind that I've just slivered. And we're going to put them over the top as a garnish. And the more of them you put on there, the more nutrition you're going to add to the soup. Do some experimenting. Switch one green for another in a recipe. Try them raw, try them hot. Don't cook any of them longer than 30 minutes, but enjoy yourself. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.